So before we can start actually programming, I want to take a little bit of time and talk about what we will actually be covering in this course. So first of all, JavaScript is like a language, and like a language, it has its own grammar. Sort of similar to the English language, another word we can call it is syntax. The syntax is JavaScript's commands, words, and punctuation. Remember when you were younger and you didn't understand English or whatever your primary language was? You went to school and studied. At first the words didn't make much sense, but eventually words made sense more together, grammar was added, and sentences started to form. Before you knew it, you could write a paragraph, or even eventually a novel. This is exactly the same process you grow through when you learn JavaScript or any online programming language. Nothing makes sense at first, but eventually you have no problems working with JavaScript. It just takes time. Keep in mind that every programming language has its own syntax, just like the English language that we speak in our day-to-day lives. Throughout this course, we are also going to be covering many programming concepts that are related to JavaScript and many other online languages. You will be learning about all kinds of exciting things such as strings, variables, statements, HTML, and much, much more. These concepts can then be applied to other languages online, making this course an excellent solution to anyone just getting started with learning web development. By the end of this course, I bet I can have you even talking like a seasoned programmer, as we will be covering all of that as well. For example, now you know what syntax means. With this course, you will also learn the best practices and proven ways to make your programs perform all the best they can. Last but not least, you will of course be doing a lot of programming in this course. By the end of the next video, you will be creating your very first JavaScript program, so you're going to learn a lot. I can definitely assure you of that. So, alright, grab yourself some Java, no pun intended, and let's get started. Let's learn some JavaScript. First of all, we need to make a new folder on our desktop, and I advise you to make it on your desktop so that you can access this folder at any time throughout this course. I made a folder here, and I'm going to call it JavaScript Basics. And what we're going to do here is we're going to open up a file, and we're going to open up a text document, and we can call this document whatever we like. Alright, so we have a name for my text document here, and we're going to again open it up so we can edit it, just so you guys can see. And what we're going to do here is we're going to add a few little syntax things for HTML, just so that everything works here. And you guys don't have to worry about this too much, I'm just going to add this in really quick. Alright, so we have the overall syntax of our HTML document made, and again, don't worry about this too much. I'm going to cover this in more detail later on in the course. I just want to get you guys set up and running. But basically what we have here is we have HTML tags, and basically what these two tags mean is anything within these two tags are going to be our HTML, and then in our HTML tags we have our script tags. Anything in the script tags is going to be JavaScript. Again, don't worry about this if this is confusing. We'll be covering things like syntax later on. But just keep in mind that all of our JavaScript is going to be in these two script tags right here. So in these two tags, we're going to write our first command. And this command is going to be our alert command. Now, what this command does is it sends a notification box to the user to alert them of whatever message we write. So if we click in our brackets here, and add a message, this message will pop up on the screen in a notification box for the user. So we have our commands entered here, and what we need to do now is, after this part is entered here, we need to make sure that there is a semicolon at the end of our command. All commands and statements in JavaScript need to have semicolons after them since they run in order. So if we were to ever to make a statement and not have a semicolon, we're going to get an error, and the next statement will not be able to run until this one is completed. So you always want to make sure it's a semicolon after whatever statement we enter here. You can kind of think of it like a sentence in English. You always want to have a period at the end of your sentence, but in JavaScript you want to have a semicolon. So now in order to get this actual program to work, we're going to need to save it. So we're going to go up to File here. We're going to hit Save As. And we're going to save it as whatever name you like, but at the end you're going to want to make sure you write .html. What this is going to do, it's going to tell our computer to open up this file as an HTML file. So again, if we go back to our folder here, you're going to see that there's now a new document here, and this is going to be a web browser document. So if you guys have Firefox, Google Chrome, or whatever it is you're using, it's now going to be openable in your web browser. So let's double click this and open it up here, and we can see here that our message is now displaying that we wrote earlier in a notification box. And if we hit OK, the program is now done. So this is how we're going to open up our programs, and as we get more familiar with programming in JavaScript, we're going to be using an actual code editor, and that's what we're going to cover later on. But for now, we're just going to be using Notepad for this lesson. So let's open up our document back up. And in this document, we're going to write another command. And this command is going to be slightly different. So let's go over this really quickly. This is called the document.write command. And what this command does is it'll write text onto the page that the user is viewing. So again, in these brackets here, we can enter in some quotations. And we want to make sure there's a semicolon after the end of this command. Don't worry about what the dot means right now. We're going to be covering this later. And if we save this again, and then open it up again, we can see that our first statement that we entered, the notification box, pops up, and then if we hit OK, the next statement enters in and it outputs whatever we wrote in the document.write here onto the page. So I wanted to do this to demonstrate you guys that statements basically run one after another. You'll see that it ran the first one first, and then it ran the second one right after the first one completed. And the first one completed after we clicked that OK box. So it's important to understand that JavaScript runs statements from top to bottom. It starts at the top and reads all the way to the bottom, and we'll go through the statements as we enter them in our program. So this looks a little bit confusing and looks a little bit sloppy, and that's because we're using Notepad. As you get through this course, we're going to learn how to use different code editors. But to close this lesson up, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you guys an actual code editor that I use, and the one I installed is called Notepad++. So if I look at our browser document that we made, that we saved it as, if we right click it, we can hit edit with this. And if you install your coding notepad, whatever text editor you're using, usually there'll be an option to open it directly. And if we click edit with Notepad++, which is the one I'm using, we can see here that everything looks a little bit different than what it looks in Notepad. It looks a little bit more better. The code is easier to read. We have color coded. You can see that everything's a little bit more organized. And what we can do, which is pretty cool here, I'm going to close this here, is we can save this directly in here. Just hit save. Like, oh, we got to make a change first, so let's change this to alright, so let's give this a save. And if we close this, open up our browser again, we can see that it's instantly applied. So it saves us a lot of time between saving and whatnot. We can enter the file, edit the file directly. So what you're going to want to do is you want to get a text editor. I'm going to give you guys a link to Notepad++ that I use, but you can really use any coding text editor you want. You can spend a little bit of time looking at some options. There's a lot of free ones out there. There's even some paid ones which are pretty good, but just grab anything you want for now. I recommend If you want to follow along with me throughout this course, you can use Notepad++, but it doesn't really matter what you have. But that's pretty much brings it a close to this lesson. Congratulations! You've just completed your first JavaScript program. Be proud of yourself. You just did something that's very hard, and although we just started off slow, you're well on your way to becoming a JavaScript developer. I'll see you in the next section of the course where we work more with JavaScript programming. Congratulations! Alright, so in order to start this course out, before we can get into the real programming and doing all the actionable stuff in JavaScript, what we first need to understand is what really is JavaScript. So if we type in what is JavaScript into Google, the result that we get is JavaScript is an object-oriented computer programming language commonly used to create interactive effects within web browsers. So in this video later on, we're going to learn and we're going to show you guys some examples of what JavaScript can do in your web browser. But for now, just understand that JavaScript is a common programming language used in web browsers to create websites and do a lot of cool effects from your web browser. So to give you a better example of what JavaScript actually is, let's look at some final end products of some great examples of JavaScript on the web. Alright, so now let's look at some live examples of what JavaScript can do on the internet. Keep in mind that JavaScript is not to be confused with Java. Java and JavaScript are two very separate things. So, let's talk about Java very briefly. JavaScript first started out as a small language used for web applications to run on the web, but is now used as a powerful programming language online. We can see here that this website called the Interactive Ear is a cool little website used by JavaScript to really show us what the inner part of the ear is and different things like that. This is a nice interactive page that somebody built just using JavaScript. In the next example, we create digital chemistry, which is another interactive website that shows people different things about chemistry, and we have this nice little page that auto loads as we go down here. Some nice effects, all used with JavaScript. Maps.td is a website where we can look at different maps in the world. Keep in mind that Google Maps and Google Earth is also run by using JavaScript. Here we have somebody who created Command and Conquer using JavaScript. So this is a cool, very, very cool thing that somebody did to recreate the actual game itself just using JavaScript and HTML. Amazon Cloud Reader and Amazon's website uses a lot of JavaScript to function. The very popular Pinterest uses JavaScript, as well as Facebook, Twitter, and all those websites as well. BrowserQuest, another video game based website online, all created with JavaScript. And we have this really cool game which is called Draw Stickman, which you basically are drawing a stickman using JavaScript. So pretty cool stuff we have going on here. So a lot of different interactive ways we can use online. So it takes a lot of hard work to build anything that I showed you so far in this video. But this course will teach you the basics and provide you with a strong foundation that you will need in order to get off to a good start online. So don't sweat it. In the next few lessons, you're going to be building your own JavaScript program as well. It won't be advanced as these examples, but everybody's going to start somewhere, and this is where you're going to start your journey in learning JavaScript online. It's very common to keep all of your JavaScript files separate from your HTML files. This helps you organize everything, especially once your files start to get really big. Make sure that when you create your JavaScript file, you don't put your HTML, CSS, or anything else in there. Just use JavaScript for now. We can see here in this document, I have inserted some JavaScript at the top here. We have a document.write command. If we save this page and open it, we can see that our JavaScript will be opened up at the very top of our page here for our web page content. Now, what we're going to do in this lesson is we're going to take this JavaScript code and make it into a separate file, then import that file into our HTML document. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create the JavaScript we had before, and I'm going to create a new file and call it JS. We're then going to open up that notepad file, and we're going to file save as js.js. It is important that you have the JavaScript file extension for this file in order for our computer to know that it is indeed a JavaScript file. We can see here that now that file is different, and we can delete our old notepad file we had before. We are now going to open up and edit our new JavaScript file in our Notepad++ or whatever code editor you have. We're then going to take our command here, we're going to copy and paste it, then we're going to paste it into our new JavaScript file. We're going to delete what we have here. And next up, we are going to add some new tags. We're going to add a head tag here. And basically, the head tags you don't need to worry about now. We will explain it later. But just for now, in the head tags, we are actually going to import our JavaScript. So let's look at this command a little bit deeper. Now with this command, in the quotations, what we do is write the file path to our external JavaScript file. You remember I named our file js.js. So as long as our file here is in the same folder as our HTML document, all we have to do is put the name of a file plus the extension, which in our case is JS. Before you preview this, make sure that you save your HTML document as well as your external JavaScript file. And we can see here that our JavaScript code is now displaying correctly in our external sheet. One thing that I'm going to point out really quickly is that the placement that we have our JavaScript on our web page can dramatically affect performance and the loadability of our web page. Generally speaking, you want to put your JavaScript at the bottom of your web page if possible. So I'm going to add some footer tags here. And I'm going to place my JavaScript source file in here. So now what happens here is that the web page content will load first, and then our JavaScript file will load right after. You can see here that now our JavaScript code is placed at the end of the document instead of appearing at the top. If at all possible, you always want to place it at the end. So for the rest of this course, I'm going to be creating all our lectures and all the coding content using external JavaScript files. If you need help with this or you just can't get this to work, then please consult the teacher files that I will add to download that you can view. So to sum things up for this lecture, try to keep your JavaScript in an external file that is separate from your HTML and CSS. This will help you a lot as your projects get bigger. If possible, inserting your source code at the end of your HTML document will let the HTML load first and the JavaScript separate, increasing performance and page load speed of your website. Try linking your own external JavaScript file for practice and see if you can get it working correctly. Once you have finished this, I will be waiting for you in the next lecture of the course. Alrighty everybody, so I hope you're loving the course so far. And in today's lecture, I have a challenge for you to do. This is the JavaScript console challenge. Now, I wrote this program, but I seem to be having troubles getting it to work. You see, the problem is when I run this program in my browser, and I open the JavaScript console, I'm getting all these problems, these errors are popping up here, and I'm going to need your help to fix this. So what I need you to do is I need you to take these code files. There's going to be 2 in a sheet that you can download in the external resources for this lecture. So go to external files and download the zip file. In the zip file, there will be 2 files here, and I need you to fix this JavaScript code here so that there's no errors in the JavaScript console. If you can do that, that'd be awesome. You passed the test. So I challenge you to do this on your own. If you guys are having any trouble, don't worry. We're going to go through this in the next lecture, and I'm sure you guys everything you need to know. So try it on your own, and best of luck, and let's fix this program, guys. Let's use the JavaScript console and fix this program. Let's redo that. Alright everybody, so I'm in the console challenge here, and these are the 2 documents that I have. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open up our program here in the browser. I'm going to run the console. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to look at some of the errors that pop up here. We can see here that we have some syntax errors. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up our actual document here. So I'm going to open up with my Notepad++. And in here, I'm just going to take a quick look and see if there's anything missing in the syntax. So we can see that our alert command looks like it's pretty fine. Our document.write command is pretty good. Oh, whoops, look at that. We're missing a bracket right here. So let's add that bracket in. Now, that looks much better. Let's continue down the page. Oh, we can see we're missing a G here, so we're just going to enter that in really quickly. And that looks pretty good. And in the next console.log, we can see here that everything looks pretty good, except for a very common mistake is if you guess we forgot the semicolon, then you are absolutely correct. So I'm going to stick that in there, and I'm going to save this file here, and I'm going to point out that you guys, a shortcut to save, instead of going File, Save every time you want to save, is you can hit Control S on Windows. So now our file has saved. If we open up a file again, we can see that we have our notification box pops up here, and we have fixed this line of code. So we have completed our challenge. Now, this is how I would go about debugging this program. You can use the console step by step, or if you're more seasoned, you can kind of take a quick look. By using the console, we could see that we had a couple syntax errors. So basically spelling mistakes, all that common stuff, not putting semicolons, that's, not closing your brackets, that's probably the most common thing that happens, especially when beginner JavaScript programmers start working with JavaScript. So if that ever happens, syntax is probably the first thing you want to check. So if you complete this program by yourself, I'm going to congratulate you. That's awesome. If you needed help, that's fine too. Everybody needs help here and there, and that's why I'm here. So now we have the solution to this program, and we're all good to go. In the next lecture, I'm going to give you guys a brief quiz and test you guys on the JavaScript basics that we learned so far, and then we're going to move on to the next section of the course, which is going to be learning about variables and all that kind of fun stuff in JavaScript. So I'll see you in the next quiz, and we'll go on from there. Variables are going to be important, and you're going to be using them a lot as you create programs throughout this course. A variable is generally used to keep track of information when it comes to programming in JavaScript. Let's take a look at a popular game on the web called BrowserQuest. BrowserQuest is a popular game created on the web using just JavaScript. If you ever get the chance, check it out, it's pretty cool. But enough about that, let's get to the point. As we play the game, we can see that things such as our health, score, lives, and damage. Our health, for example, is a variable that changes depending on what happens in the game. Our score, or our lives, is another example of a variable. The main point I'm trying to make is that a variable is something that represents a certain value in our game, and is always constantly changing. Here is an example of the basic syntax we use for creating a variable in JavaScript. Here we can see that our first keyword, called var, is short for variable. The next word is going to be the name of your variable, which can be whatever you like. Next, we have an equal sign and a number. What this statement is saying is variable lives equals 3. When we are creating a variable and giving it a name, we are assigning a value to that variable. Now let's do a more hands-on approach, and let's create another example of a variable we might use in a program. Let's use a variable and add it to our document.write command. So I'm going to write a basic command here, which is going to be our document.write command, and I'm going to add a string in this command. So let's type in the following. So now that we have our document.write command here, let's add a variable to this program, and let's do a more hands-on approach. So I'm going to type in var, and the name of my variable is going to be example. And inside the brackets in the quotation marks of example, we're going to give it the value of I am a variable. What this basically says is that example equals I am a variable. So if we ever insert the keyword example, then the text I am a variable will be outputted to the file. Basically, our variable is just representing something, and in this case, example is representing the string that we declared earlier. So if we save this and then run our program, we can see that the value of example will be outputted to the document with our document.write command. The cool thing about variables is that we can change them as much as we like in our programs. Let's go back and change our variable to do something else. Since we already declared our variable example, we can omit the var part of this variable and just type example equals whatever we like it to be. Now, because JavaScript reads our commands from top to bottom, we need to make sure that if we are going to change a variable, we need to insert it after our document.write command here. So we're going to grab this piece of code here, copy it, then after the document.write command, we're going to paste it. So what we're doing here is we're declaring our example variable as a certain string, writing it to the document, then after that gets written, we're giving it a different value and then writing that new value to the document. The part up here is going to run first, and then the part on the bottom is going to run right after it. So let's save this and see what happens when we run the program. There we go. We can see that our variable changes throughout our program and has two different values that are outputted to the document. This is the power of variables, and you will learn why this is important as you work more with JavaScript. In the next video, we're going to be talking more about syntax and naming your variables because there's a few rules that we need to follow. So I hope you are enjoying the course thus far. And if I were you in your shoes, I'd imagine that you want to move on and do more programming. But before we can do that, let's talk a little bit more about variables because there are some rules as JavaScript developers and programmers we must follow. For instance, you can't go around naming your variables whatever you like. There are some keywords that we cannot use. For example, var is one of those keywords. We can't name a variable var. This is one example, however there are many more we can't use. You should check out the external links in this lecture as I've included a reference to a list of all the different keywords that would give you a syntax error if you try to use them as a variable name. If you ever get a syntax error when you are creating a variable and can't figure out what is the problem, then this might be a likely cause. The next thing worth mentioning is that a variable is not allowed to start with a number, but they can end with a number. All variables must start with a letter. Here is an example of what I mean. One time is an example of a wrong variable, while time1 is a correct name for a variable. Variables can also only contain the following characters: letters, numbers, the $ value, and underscores. Here are some more examples of correct variables and incorrect variables. Take a second to study the sheet and try to find out the reason why each one is correct and why the incorrect variables are wrong. To sum this lesson up, I want to mention that it is important that you make your variable names clear, informative, and easy to understand. For example, player1 is a better choice for a variable instead of p1. Player1 clearly tells us what our variable is about. P1 kind of could lead to confusing if somebody else was to use your code, or if it's been a long time since you've used this piece of code and you just forgot what P1 was referencing to. Well, that's it for naming variables. Let's take a quick quiz and move on with the course. So now that you have a good understanding of what variables are, let's talk a little bit about strings and numbers. When you're entering information into a variable, we are adding a value to that variable. But there are two types of values we can add to a variable. These are strings and numbers. Let's go over numbers first. Numbers are used for simple math equations and calculations. We will be working with numbers a lot in this course. But for now, let's focus on strings. Strings are used for storing text and words. Here is an example of a string being used in a command. The string in this example is that part of the text that is in the quotations, like I have highlighted here. Here are some more examples of strings commonly used in JavaScript. Strings can either be single quoted or double quoted. So now that you know what numbers and strings are, we can now move on further in the course. We will be working with strings and numbers a lot, so it's good to have a solid foundation and understanding of how they work in JavaScript. You've learned quite a few commands so far in this course, so by now you should be slowly getting used to using them. In today's lesson, you are going to learn how to capture a user's input by using the prompt command. Let's look at a live example of a simple program that might use this command. We can start this command off by typing the following. We are then going to be adding a string to our prompt command as follows. Let's now run the program and see what happens when you run it in our web browser. An alert box will pop up and allow our visitor to type in their age, but where did that number go? Well, we can assign a variable to our prompt command and then output that variable to our page or use it in another command. Let's go through this step by step. First off, I'm going to give a variable to our prompt command and give it the name visitor age so I know what it will be referring to. Next up, I'm going to write a document.write command and I'm going to insert our visitor name variable in our command. So basically what's going on here is we're taking whatever the user inputs into the variable visitor age and outputting it to the document. Let's save this file and see if our program is going to work correctly as we intended it to. There we go. We can see that our visitor's age is being outputted to the page successfully. Pretty cool, huh? In the next lesson, you will learn how to combine strings together. Now that you know how to collect information from a visitor using the prompt command, we can start to build some programs that have a little bit of interactivity involved in them. In today's lesson, you're going to be learning how to combine strings together to create some messages from our visitor's input. Using the example from our last program, we are going to take our visitor's age and add that input to another message. So let's start by creating a variable for the prompt command. I'm also going to add a variable for the user's name as well. So we're going to have two variables in this program, one for our visitor's age and one for their name. So we're going to output this information to the document by using the document.write command. So just follow along with me as I type this out, and what I'm basically doing here is I'm creating a string and I'm adding a plus sign. And with this plus sign, I'm going to type out our two variables here. I'm going to first enter the visitor's name. And what this is going to do is that visitor name variable is going to grab the string and insert it into the string we're already typing here. Notice that I add a plus sign before and after the variable because I'm going to be adding a more string, and then after this part of the string we're going to insert our other variable. So again, we add the plus sign and then we just type out our variable. This is the basic syntax for adding your strings together in JavaScript. We have our hello part plus visitor name, the rest of our string, and then our visitor's age. Pretty simple. We're going to save this and see if our program is running correctly. Alright, so I'm going to type in my age here. And I'm going to type a name. Alright, we can see that everything's working perfectly as we planned. You notice that there's not spaces in our strings, and this is because JavaScript does not add spaces automatically, so we have to go into our strings here and just add a little space here. And once we preview the program again, we can see that the spaces will be added to our strings. So I'm going to go through here and enter my age, of course, and my name again. And we can see that the spaces are added just like we want. So this looks a little bit better. Keep in mind that when we add and combine strings together in JavaScript, it is called concatenation. This is a fancy word for combining strings together. Alright, so that's pretty much the basics of combining strings in JavaScript. Try to do this in some of your programs to get some practice, and we'll move on to the next lesson where we will talk further about working with strings. As a JavaScript developer, you're going to be learning a lot, and there's going to be some problems that you're not going to know the answer to. Even after you finish this course, I guarantee you will still need further help and be able to find information. In this lesson, I'm going to show you some resources you can use to help you troubleshoot common problems you are going to encounter as a JavaScript developer. First, let's look at the Mozilla Developer Network. If, for instance, you ever need help with strings, you can reference the JavaScript section of the MDN. There are all types of commands, messages, and properties listed on this page that can help you with your coding. Anytime you have a problem or just want to learn something new, you can come here and reference all the helpful information for free. For example, let's use the MDN to learn a new command we can use to work with our new strings. Let's take a look at the link command. On this page, we can see all the information about this command as well as example we can use to try it out with. Let's take the example and add it to our JavaScript program just for this lesson. Here we are creating a variable called hotText, and we are giving it the value of MDN. Then we are creating another variable called URL, and the value is the link to the MDN website. With our console.log command, we are writing to the console the following: our string plus our value from hotText, then using the link command to make our URL variable a hyperlink, that if we click on it, it will take us directly to the web page. This might be a little bit complicated, especially when you're using commands you have never seen before, but don't worry, practice will make you better. Let's run the program and see what happens. We can see that we have our text on our page, and then we have a link we can click here that takes us to the Mozilla Developer Network. Pretty cool, eh? Try using the link command with other commands you have learned so far to create a program of your choice. In the next lesson, you are going to use the information you have learned so far to create a web page that welcomes visitors to a web page and greets them. Alright everybody, so I hope you're ready to do some programming, because in this lecture, what I need you guys to do is I need you guys to build me a program. So what we're going to do is pretend as if I'm a client, and you're working for me, and I need a program, and I need you to have the following features. So we're going to go over this step by step, and like usual, you can follow along. I want you guys to try and do it on your own, and if you have any problems, you can watch me in the next video where I will come up with my own solution to the program. Doesn't necessarily mean that yours will be the same, but I will come up with my way of how I would do it. Alright, so let's look at the program, and let's look at what you need to include in your program in order to pass the challenge. So first of all, download the HTML and JavaScript files for this challenge. Second, your program needs to welcome the user to the web page via an alert box. Then you need to ask the user for their name. And then you need to ask the user for their favorite color. Then you're going to combine the user's name and the user's favorite color into a string that goes as follows, and write that string to the document. Hello, user. Your favorite color is user's favorite color. Finally, output a program complete string to the console to let us know that your script has run successfully without any errors. If you think you can handle this on your own, try and give it a go. If you have any problems, don't worry. I'll be here in the next video to show you the complete solution to the variable and strings challenge. Good luck, guys. I hope everybody is having a great day. In this lesson, we're going to show you guys the solution to the variable and strings challenge that I presented to you in the last lecture. Alright, so let's get started. So the first thing we need to do is we need to welcome our user to the page with an alert box. So the easiest way to do this would be using the alert command and typing in a string such as hello or welcome to our website. You can use whatever you want here. We then need to ask our user for a name. So I'm going to create a variable and call it visitor name, and then I'm going to prompt the user and ask them, what is your name? Make sure I add my quotes here. Alright, so we got that captured. We are then going to prompt the user and ask them for their favorite color and save it in the variable called visitor's color, or favorite color here in this case. So the next thing we need to do is we need to combine the user's name and favorite color together into a string that goes as follows. Okay, so this part we're going to have to combine our strings together, remember? And we're going to have to start it off by writing a document.write command because we got to output it to the page. What we're going to do is we're going to take the string that we required and we're going to enter it in here, and then instead of the spots for the user's name and the user's favorite color, we're going to put the variables that we created earlier that's going to store that information and then output it to the page. So here we're going to put the visitor's name, then we're going to finish typing out our string here, and then we're going to insert the favorite color as well. Remember that when you make your strings that you add a space before your variable and after your variable so that everything's not too squished together. Okay, so our program is looking pretty good. We're almost done. Next up we need to do is we need to output a program complete message to the console. So we can simply do this by doing console.log and then typing something along the lines of program complete or anything like that would be acceptable in this manner. Okay, so we're going to save our program and hopefully everything runs pretty good. Let's check it out and see what happens. Okay, so we're welcomed. I'm going to enter my name here, and then I'm going to enter my favorite color in. We can see, oh, there we go. Hello, Robin, your favorite color is green. So that part's working pretty good. But we got to check the console.log, remember? And we can see that our program complete. So we can see that everything in the program ran successfully. And that's a challenge for you guys. So if you guys had trouble with that, that's fine. Just watch the video and then try to create it again on your own if possible. And for anybody who did complete the program, let me know. I want to hear how you guys did. If you guys passed it, that's awesome. Let us know if you have any issues. Write about it in the discussion settings of the video. And we can move on to the next section after that. But before we can, you guys need to do one quick little quiz on strings. And then we're going to talk about numbers and math. Hello everybody, how is it going? Alright, so far we have talked in depth about both strings and variables. So now we are going to shift our focus towards numbers, which are equally as important in JavaScript. Numbers are used in all types of calculations and programming. Our score in a video game, adding the total of purchases, seeing how much money you owe. These are all examples of how numbers are used in programming. First, let's talk a little bit about integers before we can move on. A whole number is what we call an integer. Here are some examples of what integers will look like. 55, 78, 33333, 9, 67. All these are all examples of whole numbers, or what we call in programming integers. Next up are floating point numbers. Floating point numbers are the same as integers except that they have a decimal place in them. 0.1, 0.55555, decimal 23 are all examples of floating point numbers. Lastly, we have scientific notation. We can even use scientific notation for calculations in JavaScript. Here are some examples, but keep in mind that isn't used that much, and don't worry if this makes much sense. You can use this just as reference. Here is an example of how we can assign a number to a variable of each of the different types of numbers that we just discussed. Do you notice something different here than when we assign variables to strings? The main difference to notice is that we assign a number to a variable, and when we do, we don't use quotations, otherwise our number will be treated like a string. Later on in this course, you will learn how to convert a string to a number, but for now, I want you to focus on the difference between the two and how we assign them to variables. Strings, we use quotations. Numbers, we just type the number in and leave out the quotations. That's the main thing that is important for now. Okay, so once that makes sense for you, we can move on to the next course and we're going to be working more with numbers. As you progress through your JavaScript career and journey, you're going to realize that programs require you to do a lot of math. In this lesson, we are going to be looking at how we can use math to build a program in JavaScript that will tell a user how many days they have been alive for. But before we can do that, we need to learn how to do basic math in JavaScript. So let's begin. To add numbers together in JavaScript, we use the plus sign. A fancy word for the plus sign is also the addition operator. So here we are adding 9 plus 3. If we wanted to subtract 3 from 9, we would simply use the minus sign. If we wanted to divide two numbers, we would use the slash sign shown like this. To multiply two numbers, we would use the asterisk symbol. Calculations in JavaScript are usually done when we take input from a visitor and use that input to come with our final outcome. Take our program that will calculate how many days you have been alive, for example. We are going to need to prompt the user and ask them for their age. Then take that number and multiply it by how many days are in a year. But how do we write that in code? Before we can do that, we need to talk a little bit more about doing calculations with variables. Let's say, for example, we were creating a game where a plumber had to save the princess from a giant turtle in his castle. Every time our player would grab a mushroom, he would gain 1 life. We could write something like this. Variable lives equals 3. Lives equals lives plus 1. What this line of code is saying is our variable lives is first equal to 3. We would then insert the second part of the code whenever a player collected a mushroom. It's basically saying lives equals the current value of lives, then adding 1 to that number, then the final number will be stored back in the variable lives. So at the end, lives would be equal to 4. There is also a shorthand version for adding in JavaScript as well, which is as follows. Lives plus equals 1. You can use either version you like, just pick the one that makes sense. So we're going to stick with the basic version just so you understand what it means. I have included a reference page in the external file as part of this lecture you can take a look at for a full list of shorthand syntax for doing calculations in JavaScript. So let's build our program. The first thing that we are going to need to do is we need to figure out what the visitor's age is. So we're going to have to prompt the user what their age is. So to make a variable, call it visitor's age, and then write the prompt command, something along the lines of asking them for their age. Once we have that all figured out, we could then create another variable, and we're going to call this one years alive. Basically what this variable is going to do is we're going to take that string that they entered in and convert it to a number. And parseInt does exactly that. So we're going to take our visitor's age here, insert it in the brackets here, and basically what this is doing is we're taking our visitor's age, taking the string from it, converting that string to a number, and then saving it as years alive. So now that our string is saved as a number, we can actually do some multiplication with it. So the next line of code, we need to take the visitor's years lived and multiply it by how many days are in a year. Okay, so now we're going to do our math. What we're going to do is we're going to take our years alive variable and we're going to multiply it by how many days are in a year. In this case, there are 365 days in a year. So basically, we're taking the user's years alive, taking that string, converting it to a number, then multiplying that number by 365, then making a document.write command and outputting that number and a string that we're going to create here. Seems a little bit complicated, but once you get in the hang of doing math and multiplication in JavaScript, it's not too bad. So here we have a nice little program that would tell somebody how many days they've been alive for. Pretty neat. So we're going to finish entering our strings here. Then once we are finished, we can save the program and then test it and see if everything is working correctly. Alright, so let's add in my age, which is 24. We can see I've been alive for 8,760 days. That seems like a long time. Just to be sure though, we're going to pick another number and enter it in here. And we can see that with 2, our multiplication is correct. So this program is working exactly as we intended to. Let's do one more just to be sure. Alright, awesome. Everything's working perfectly. You are now ready to work with the math object, which is very important for doing calculations in JavaScript. I'll see you guys in the next video. In today's JavaScript lesson, you are going to learn how to create random numbers using the math object. So for reference, in case you forgot, strings and numbers are two different types of objects, and these objects have properties. For example, a string can have a length property which outputs how many characters are in that string. Objects also have actions that they can perform, which we call methods in JavaScript. For example, we can take a string and add the lowercase method, which will change all the characters to lowercase even if we type them in capital letters. In this lesson, however, we are going to focus on the math object. So let's talk about that for a second. With the math object, we can do all kinds of advanced mathematical calculations. For example, if we go to the MDN, we can see that there is a math property for the math object that lets us calculate the square root of a number, or get the number of pi, which we use to calculate the area of a circle. We can also see all the methods listed on the side here as well. The main method that we are going to be looking at is the math.random method. So let's type this in and see what happens. I'll give this random number a variable as well so that we can write it to the document. Okay, so if I run the program, we can see a random floating point number between 0 and up to, but not including 1, is displayed. I'm going to hit F5 a few times, which is the keyboard shortcut for refresh, so you can see that every time we run a program, we do actually get a random number. But what if we wanted a whole number instead of, let's say, between 1 and 50? Well, what we could do is we could multiply our result by 50. If we run a program, we can see that we're getting a little bit closer to what we want. The problem is we still don't have our integer yet. Luckily, JavaScript also has a way for us to easily do this with the math.floor method and the math.ceiling method. Math.floor will round the number to the lowest integer, and math.ceiling will round the number to the highest. So if we wanted to make sure that we hit a number between 1 and 50, we would use the math.floor command just in case, so we don't get a 51 by accident. Now this might look a little bit complicated, but it's not too bad. Just try to follow along with me. In JavaScript, the code inside the innermost parenthesis happens first, then we work our way outwards. So if we look at this statement, the following happens. First, a random number between 0 and up to, but not including 1, is generated. Then that random number is multiplied by 50. Then the decimal is rounded down. The code might be complicated, but the main thing that is important is that you understand what is going on here. We also add the +1 at the end, so that if we do get a possible 50, since we are rounding down, we can only get a max of 49. So that's why we have the +1 just in case. If we run our program, we can see that we now found a solution that gives us a whole integer between 1 and 50. So using all this knowledge that you learned in this lecture, let's create a program that generates a random number between 1 and 16. You've been working a lot with numbers and doing a lot of math in this section of the course. Don't worry, we're almost done. We just have a challenge and then a quiz, and you'll be done with this section. Your project for this challenge is to do the following. Create a program that generates a random number between 1 and what the user inputs. For example, your user inputs the number 20. Your program must then generate a number between 1 and 20. Then write it to the document so the user can see the random number generated. Like usual, see if you can complete this project on your own. If you get stuck or need help, come join me in the next video where I will walk you through the solution step by step. I wish you luck and let me know how you do in this challenge. Alright, so the goal for this challenge was to create a program that would generate a number between 1, whatever the user inputs, as a second number. Like usual, I encourage you to try this program on your own, but if you're stuck or need help, let's walk through this step by step. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a variable and call it user number. We're going to use the prompt command to ask the user to enter a number. Alright, so once we have that all figured out, we can then take that number and we're going to change that number to an integer by using the parseInt command. Remember that we need to type a variable into the brackets here. So now we're taking our floating point number and changing it to a whole number, or we like to call an integer. Next, we're going to take our whole number and then do our calculations for that number so that our number is going to round between 1 and whatever the user inputs. We're going to use the same code we used in the last video. But instead, we're going to use the variable user number instead of the 50 that we had before. Remember to add the +1 at the end. Otherwise, you're not going to hit the top number that the user inputs. Next, we're going to create an alert box and alert it, the user, what the random number is. I think I might have mentioned to write it to the page in the last episode, but that's okay. You can use the alert box fine here. Alright, so I think our code is good to go. We're going to save everything here and hopefully it all runs smoothly. Again, we can see here that we're prompting the user, asking them for a number, taking that number and changing it from a floating point number to a whole number, taking that whole number, then using our formula here to generate our number between whatever the user inputs, and then we're just alerting it so that the user knows the number is. Let's give it a run. Alright, so I'm going to enter a number here. Okay, we can see that our random number is generated. Let's do it again a couple more times, just to see that our program is working correctly. Alright, so I think we got a program that's working pretty fine. So again, I'm going to congratulate you guys if you managed to finish it on your own. If you need help, that's fine too. You're pretty much done working with numbers. We're going to do a quick quiz, and after this, we're going to move on to conditional statements.